Hi, so today I'm here with Alex Mackenzie, who's very kindly come over to chat to us about her career. Alex, thanks so much for dropping in.
You're very welcome.
Can you tell us, could you give us maybe a quick rundown of your career history so far?
Sure. So I decided to study languages at first because that's what I enjoyed the most and I love traveling. So I studied French and Spanish university. And that was a blessing and a curse. So enjoyed it a lot, did well, had a great time on my year abroad, which I strongly recommend to everyone doing a year abroad. But when I came out, I was left with the question of what on earth do I do with this sort of generic humanities degree? And I ended up joining a really fast growing startup in London that was called Cognolink at the time and is now known as ThirdBridge. And that's a sort of networking company for investors. Picture Wolf of Wall Street scenes, some really hardcore cold calling, big bonus party, champagne at the desk. And yeah, it was a little bit wild and a lot of fun. And in that job, I became head of a French team. So the languages degree actually came in pretty handy. And then I got promoted into a senior operational role there as a VP of operations.
But how did you get into that role? Did you just apply for a junior role or
Yeah, I just joined as a junior in a junior role. It was like a 20,000 classic London first job sort of thing. Went through a few interviews, got the job, moved to London within a week. Well, startups move really, really fast. So you can, if you join a startup, they usually want to move fast, get you in the door as quickly as you can, and there's a lot less process.
And was that your plan to join a startup out of college?
No, I didn't even know what a startup was.
Okay.
No, it was a company that was looking for people with really generic skills. And I think when you've studied humanities and you've done a year abroad, you've got a broad range of sort of generic skills of people that they're looking to train up into a particular job.
So one of the things with startups, right, is they're fast moving, they're high growth, but often there's not the same stability, security in place in terms of, like, let's say even having a set salary. They can be kind of chopping and changing.
Yeah.
But also they can lack structure, which can make a lot of people feel uncomfortable. Was that the case in your situation?
So on the lack of structure, that's actually the bit that I love the most in startups. So structure is the devil for me. Structure prevents you from getting promotions when you want. It prevents you from making changes in a company. Even if everyone wants the change, it's slow, it's bureaucratic. So actually something that's a bit loosey-goosey, as I would say, is brilliant, because you can wake up one morning and think, this thing that we're doing at this company is a really stupid idea. We're a 50-person company. I have breakfast with the CEO in the morning and, pass him at the coffee machine. I'm just going to tell him and we're going to implement that thing tomorrow. Mm-hmm. Or, I want to be in a management role. I've got this great idea of creating a French team. No one's ever created a French team in this company. Let's pitch that to the COO, who I chat to on my breaks all the time. And then they create that team and you're head of that team and there's all this flexibility. So I actually love the fact that there's no structure, a little structure, but not a lot of structure, and it's very flexible. I think the job security question's a really good point. I think you've got to be really careful which startup you join. So you want to be asking the right questions during the interview process around when did they last raise money, where are they at in the process of their next fundraise, and then you can get a good idea of whether it sounds like they've got loads of cash or
whether they have their themselves organized or whether they're all over the place just having a go. So what did you do then? You set up a French team, is that right?
Yeah, so I became head of the French team, which was really successful. Our company was the best out of the only 3 players in this market in Europe, but it was the best out of those 3 players. And we did really well. And that was kind of where I started making real money, not like the entry-level London salary, but because it was a sales environment, you can make big bonuses if you worked hard. Worked really, really hard. It was my first experience in management, which was amazing. I absolutely loved it. It was like nurturing these people to then also be able to succeed in their careers, also be able to save money for their first house. It was really, really rewarding. And I was able to build my own team culture that I loved as well. So it was essentially going into work, we paid a salary, but I was choosing the people that joined my team. I was creating them the way I want them to be. I guess it's like having children in a bizarre sort of way. Yeah. You get to make them the way you want them to be. Fire them if they're crap.
I'm not sure if that's the way it works, but okay. Well, I was going to say it sounds like having your own business inside the business, but making children is another way of thinking about it.
It is a bit like having your own business within a business, which actually continued to be a theme. So You asked me right at the beginning, like, what does my career look like? So I did this sort of generic operational leadership role in London for a good 5 years that got me the right sort of titles on my CV. I then did another section, which was completely different, working for an NGO, quite an innovative NGO called Give Directly in the effective altruism space, based in the Congo. And that was as a country director, which is similar to an MD there. And again, that was me having a salary from headquarters in New York, but being able to create my own culture by hiring all the people myself, firing the people that, weren't any good or didn't fit with the culture, the values, the competencies that I wanted in the team, and that sort of stuff. So that's always been a theme, actually.
Yeah, amazing. But like, I love the energy that you bring to it, and how you're able to move through it and have your own kind of businesses internally. But it's like, it sounds like it was easy for you. It sounds like there was no challenge there. Like you came out of college, then you went into a junior role, then an operations role. Now you're leading a team, you're running a business inside your company. Was it like...
It was bloody hard.
Was it? Yeah. So can you tell, like, what were the sort of challenges? Because, it can't have been too easy.
Yeah, loads. I don't know where to start. The set of challenges in London, working in the city, so different to the set of challenges being a leader in Congo, Eastern Congo. Which one are you most interested in hearing about?
Well, let's start with London. Like, how do you learn about leadership, or about managing people, or about coaching people, about being a leader in that? Because I think a lot of people might think, or at least I would have thought earlier in my career, so being a manager is being nice to people and helping them and being good, but then sometimes you have to make hard decisions as well. But that's only something I've come around to in like last couple of years, say.
So that's true. My theory is that management's all about feedback. So you need to have the humility to ask your team, how can I be a better manager? And to ask them that regularly. And it's also your responsibility to make them feel comfortable giving you constructive feedback as well. And as long as you keep asking people how they want to be managed and what you can do better to support them as a manager, as opposed to dictating something, then you can learn to be a pretty good manager quite well. There's also the flip side, which is that I think some qualities in good leaders, managers are inherent. I think you do have to have empathy. You do have to have good communication skills, and sure, you hone them whilst you're being a manager. But I think if inherently you're not particularly good at those skills, you might always run into trouble managing people.
Right. So you found having a very close feedback loop, or a very quick feedback loop, allowed you to learn quickly and be able to become a better manager. And then you learned how to make hard decisions along the way, somewhere maybe by seeing the other managers or the other senior leadership make tough decisions.
Yeah. On the hard decisions piece, I think for me, it comes down to two skills. One is total honesty or transparency. So not making weird decisions, people not understanding why they're happening, but just being really matter of fact, like, this is the problem the business has got. This is the skill set that we need. Unfortunately, you don't have this skill set. But just total honesty so people trust you and they don't find you unpredictable. But also, most importantly, empathy. Like, we used to have a joke that I was the best person at firing people in my company, because firing or letting someone go, like, it should never be more awful than it needs to be experience for someone. If you can empathize with someone, so say someone's underperforming, and you can say to them, hey, it looks like it's really tough for you at the minute. It must suck, like, missing your target every month, and it must be awful having these sort of performance meetings with me all the time. What is it you actually want to do in life? And so I would go in for the angle of, what does this person want to achieve? Where does this person want to go? Are we giving them the opportunities they want? So they actually hate this job. They probably hate the job if they're underperforming. And I'm going off on a tangent, but it all comes back to having good empathy, good communication skills, and then you're a pretty good manager.
That's great. That makes tons of sense if you empathize with them. And yeah, definitely if they're not enjoying the job, probably they don't feel they can do their best work, and probably they want to be somewhere else anyway, but maybe confidence is taking a hit and they're not really sure how to... Yeah. So you're almost coaching them through that process of, where do you really want to be?
I actually saw my role as a manager, to coach people not just in the job, but outside of their job. There are so many people who struggle to change jobs because they just don't have the balls to actually quit or, open that web page and start thinking about other roles. And that's why some people talk to you. Help give me a leg up to do these sorts of things. But actually, a manager can do that as well. They can sit you down and have that blunt conversation with you, like, having a shit time, aren't you? Like, what's going on?
Do you really want to be here?
Do you really want to be here? Sometimes it takes you poking them in the ribs and metaphorically and being like, do you really want to be here? And then you as a manager, it's your job for me, it's my job to observe, what do I think this person's really good at? And I might say they're crap at this current role, but I might actually think they're good at X, Y, Z. And I can plant that seed and say, hey, do you not think you would really enjoy this type of job?
Yeah.
This is going above and beyond what's expected from managers, but that's how I like to manage. And then I could sleep well at night knowing that I was helping people.
I think you did them a huge favor. I think of it like pruning a tree. If the tree, like if it starts to like die a little bit and you prune it, you're actually, and like sometimes letting people go or helping them make a transition is kind of prune. Okay, you prune that and then you go somewhere else and you're going to be able to perform much better.
Exactly.
Be happier rather than slowly dying in this organization that, you know, it's not good for you, it's not good for them. So I think that's a great point. So empathy and leadership and having hard conversations and coaching them through that. So next, can you tell us a little bit about Give Directly and what they do?
Yeah, so Give Directly is this really innovative NGO, so non-governmental organisation / charity, whatever you want to call that. Historically, NGOs give people things. So imagine a mosquito net, or they can give you education or whatever. And what Give Directly decided to do was to remove all of these things that we're giving people and take all the costs associated with that. So typically, you know, a bunch of white blokes in Washington, as people would exaggerate, or every single expat that's working on international NGO work, whether it's designing programs, designing education programs, whether it's the cost of shipping mosquito nets, as my example, across the world, take all of that money and just give that money directly to an individual digitally. And you might have typical NGO work that for every pound or every euro that you give someone in a metro station, it might be that only 20 cents or 20p from that ends up in the pocket of the person, or not in cash, but in the equivalent, whether it's a mosquito net or other. Whereas with Give Directly, the goal at the time when I joined was something like 95 cents of every dollar or euro would end up with the recipient as digital money that they can then spend.
Wow. So why was the previous system in place at all?
I would say that trust is one of the key themes. People don't trust poor people to spend their money well. Like, will they spend it on prostitutes, alcohol, cigarettes? We as the superior Western people know better what they want to spend the money on. And this is a whole debate that can really go down a bit of a rabbit hole. But what we proved through study after study, and I ran one of these studies, is that people, adults in other countries, know best what they need. And they have a whole variety of needs. They don't need 5 different mosquito nets from UNICEF and whichever other companies you want to cite. They actually need the money so that they as adults can decide that they need a segment of it for healthcare, a segment of it for education, a segment of it for whatever else.
Wow. Okay. So yeah, let them decide, give them their own autonomy over their own choices.
Exactly. So imagine anyone listening to this, imagine you're hit by a hurricane or a flood or whatever humanitarian crisis you can imagine. It would be bonkers if someone from the Congo started like posting stuff to you and didn't take into consideration what your individual needs were and didn't allow you as a 30-year-old, 40-year-old adult to have any opinion on the matter.
Yeah.
Treating people as children just because they live in a particular country, which is bonkers.
Yeah, as opposed to asking them what they really need and then, or even allowing them to make their own decisions, right? The same way we all want to make our own decisions
Exactly.
as well. So what was your role then in the organization?
So this was probably the coolest job I've ever done and probably ever will do. I absolutely bloody loved this job. It was great. So I was what's called a country director. So I headed up the operations there. There were no operations in the Congo before I went. So I was person number 1 entering Congo. I think like my manager had been there for 2 or 3 days to check that mobile money existed there at some point before. So I just got on a plane within 2 weeks of my first interview. Another startup, so really fast-moving hiring process. Got on a plane. I've never been to East Africa before. And I'd never lived anywhere really insecure. So for anyone listening who doesn't know anything about Congo, it's an incredibly insecure area. It's one of the top 5 most dangerous places in the world. But my role, to answer your question, was to set up this organization in Congo. Everything from registering the company legally and buying a car to get around in, because you couldn't walk around because there's bloody kidnappings there, all the way up to raising money to actually fund the programs, to hiring the whole team, and to then running the operations, the security.
But wait, did you have any trepidations before taking on that sort of role? I would be shaking in my boots.
I remember going on YouTube and searching Goma. Goma's the location I moved to, searching Goma and just seeing like, volcanic eruption, rebels, like everything that a parent doesn't want to see their daughter doing. And I remember my dad seeing it and he was like, "You're not going." And as soon as he said, "You're not going," I was like, "I'm bloody going."
Yeah.
Get me that ticket.
Like a rebellious teenager.
Yeah. But no, I wasn't nervous at all. No. I'd actually by this point been in London for 5 to 6 years, and honestly, I was miserable from the grind of just doing the regular job. You know, I was working till midnight, just classic like city life, like every single day, just working till I was exhausted. I was pretty ill. I was a bit physically and mentally ill by this point. I worked so hard. So for me, getting on a plane to go live in the jungle was just, I don't care what the danger is. Like, this is not getting the tube in London.
Wow. Okay. So it was really a total break from everything else that you'd done before, and that's what you needed, I guess.
Yeah, because I remember thinking, I was 30 at this point, and I remember thinking, like, all I've done so far is work all my 20s, and all I'm doing is working for 2 weeks of the year to be able to go on a cool adventure on holiday somewhere I want to go. So my thought was, why don't I just go and live in a place I would go on an adventure to? Like, this place is so cool. It's got a lake, it's got volcanoes, it's got gorillas, it's, you know, it's every bit of adventure that you'd ever want. Why don't I just live there and work from that place? And by the way, this is pre-COVID, right? So this was like pretty innovative thinking at the time.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that's why I went there. And I should mention the place where I found this job is a website called escapethecity.com.
Oh, wow.
Escapethecity.com. And it's full of out-of-the-box jobs. So anything that's not the obvious career choices, like it's not doctors, it's not lawyers, it's not management consultants. It's just like really random jobs, but that are usually quite, you can filter by impactful jobs or like travel related jobs, whatever. It just helps open your mind to what could possibly exist.
It sounds like such a big, audacious undertaking to be a country manager, to set up everything from scratch, like from getting the car insurance of the car to buying the car to actually getting funding of a couple of million support, right? You don't seem like you're ever intimidated by this at all. Like, do you just think this is a fantastic challenge or a mission? Or
it was a fantastic challenge, and I think if you can prove that you can do all of those things, your CV's kind of sorted forever.
Yeah.
So it's almost like, it's like a shopping list. So how in the future can I prove that I can achieve operations in one of the hardest places in the world to achieve operations? I'm bloody going to make it happen. I'm going on a mission. I'll be able to tick that off. And now every interview question in the future, like, when have you overcome a challenge or whatever, I'm going to have the most extreme examples of these things.
It's like the interview answer to end all interview questions. It's like, I set up the country office in Congo. What else do you need to know?
Yeah. And what I would say about that is that it really opened doors to I think it really intrigues people when they see my CV or they hear about me through the grapevine. They're like, oh, I would have a coffee with that person. And I remember when I was looking to change jobs after the Congo, it was so easy for me to get a coffee with a senior person at so many businesses because, you know, maybe they were hiring for something or they were a startup and they weren't sure yet. But it was really easy for me to just write a few lines and be like, this is what I've been doing. Are you open to having a chat? And people would be like, that would be an interesting conversation. Like, sure, I'll talk to that person. Then your foot's in the door and then you start asking about the business and their roles and all the rest.
That's fascinating, right? So it was a real door opener for you. It really got you lots of coffee meetings. Yeah. What was it like setting up the office in Congo?
It was brilliant. It was so hard. It was brilliant. It was like being on my gap year, but being paid for it, but just also so difficult. Like, imagine the bureaucracy, for anyone listening that lives in Portugal, like the bureaucracy of Portugal, now imagine that on steroids and like things that just don't work in the system. Just everything was 100 times harder than elsewhere. But the satisfaction you get from overcoming those hurdles is like enormous.
Like, what was the day in the life like?
Day in the life. A lot of days were very, very different because, as I say, this role was the role was vast, right? Because I would really recommend people do something that's head of a business unit where you get exposed to lots of different things. So as I say, I was doing some fundraising, so speaking to the government, trying to raise money with them. So building relationships, persuading them to want to work with us. So I might be like face to face with a government official, telling them about the program. On the operational front, I might be going out to the field, like imagine classic African village, going door to door, doing like a quality check on what all my team were doing. So they were like filling out surveys on their phones about individuals and working out what their needs were and signing them up for mobile money to do these digital transfers. So I might be going out to the field, seeing that in real life to understand how I could improve the program. I might be doing people management stuff. So like in any job, I might be writing a performance review. I might be coaching some of my staff. I might be writing like a security protocol because there's been loads of kidnaps recently or whatever it might be. Like it was really, really vast. But I think what's great with these roles, again, to go back to the CV point and the interview point, if you've done all of these different bits as opposed to just sticking in one role, like I'm in digital marketing or whatever. If you can do these leadership roles, that you've always got an example to pull on, which has really been helpful to me.
Yeah, so that's kind of a theme of your career is that you're doing management, you're doing leadership, you're doing operations, you're always doing, I would call those process orientated things as opposed to becoming a subject matter expert on,
I don't know anything about anything.
Let's say how to make water clean in, a far off distant land. That'd be a very like niche topic. Whereas if you're doing leadership, management, operations, coaching, they're all process orientated things that are very transferable. So was that something that you did very consciously, or was that something that you just stumbled into? Oh, this is a good way. Or maybe it's just you're tapping into your natural skills.
Yes, probably that also. Probably that. I stumbled into it, but if I could have heard myself now, I would have really been pleased to hear myself to then encourage myself to do this sort of career path. It was a terrible sentence. But I think that I've never been a subject matter expert on anything. I've never known lots about anything. So I don't know loads about digital money. I don't know, right now I'm working in a peace tech organization and I've worked in an HR tech organization as well. I don't know loads about those topics, but actually the more I think about it, the better it is to remain a generalist in leadership or sales or whatever, because it means that as you grow and evolve as a person, as an adult, and your interests change, you can always change sector. So I could like wake up tomorrow and be like, do you know what? Actually, I don't want to do NGO work anymore. I'm actually really interested in fintech. I could get into that job. I'm not limited because I have all the general skills that could help me get in there.
Why do you think people struggle with that? That idea of like switching industries or tapping into their transferable skills, like you it seems to always be a very clear transition or a very clear process for you. Like if I want to change, I'm going to harness these existing skills. Why do you think people struggle with that? Any ideas?
It's really scary because you don't have an obvious career path. So my brother, for example, he's a lawyer. So you become a lawyer and then you become, I don't know what you are, like an analyst probably, then an associate, then maybe you become a director one day. You've got this obvious career path. Maybe you're a dentist and then you set up your own practice. And so I guess the future is predictable. It feels safe. And I must say, like, being a generalist is scary. And I've even come to you in the past and asked for advice and said, where do you think I could go? Because you need ideas, you need an imagination. And I think you also join companies and you don't know a lot about their particular sector. So you have to be confident being stupid. I think that's like a good piece of advice, actually. Just be confident being stupid. Like always be the person that's willing to ask stupid questions so you can learn things quickly. But yeah, it's the future is unpredictable, choosing this sort of path.
And accepting that.
But also more interesting.
Yeah.
So I know so many people who are stuck in one particular sector, or even people actually who are stuck in sectors which are like dying sectors. So I started out my career wanting to be a simultaneous interpreter for the EU Parliament. And that is like, imagine if I'd spent all my savings on that and now AI is, interpreting everything people are saying.
Yeah.
That's a dying industry. Whereas I think if you're in leadership, which is a human skill, or sales, that industry is never going to die. You're always going to need, in my opinion, don't quote me in 30 years' time, but in my opinion, you're always going to need people who run organizations, even if segments are automated. But yeah, I don't think I'll ever find myself in a dying industry because I can always pivot. And that's like, given how quickly things are changing these days, I think that's actually a real asset.
That's super important. Yeah, absolutely. The human side is still paramount these days, right? Even if we have all the new tech and innovation there. One thing that really fascinates me is you seem very open to learning. You seem very open to being, almost vulnerable. Like you're gonna go into these new situations, kind of, I don't know everything. Maybe I don't even know the local culture or the landscape, but I'm going to be open. And like you say, open to asking stupid questions, but it's kind of being vulnerable and not thinking that, or not feeling like you need to be an expert in every situation, right?
Yeah, I guess that's my disposition though. I'm a bit of a curious cat. And I think I'd be very bored in life if I was doing the same thing every single day. So if every 3 to 5 years I completely change industry, I keep learning. But you do have to be comfortable with, you can't have sort of a big ego and worry that people think you're stupid. You've just got to be okay with asking those questions.
Yeah. Great tip. I love it. Can I ask you, in Congo, were you ever worried about being there? Did you ever have any concerns about your safety? That's something that would be in my head. And I've nothing to really justify it except 5-second clips I've seen in other places,
Yeah. No, bizarrely. No, it wasn't. I think because I was in a leadership position, it was my role to find solutions. If I think about this psychologically, my answer is no. So if there was a threat, so let's say there was a physical threat from the volcano, or there was a threat of increased kidnappings, or whatever it might have been, my mindset is always, there's a problem, let's find a solution. I'm an operations person. Underneath all of this. So I love to find problems and I love to fix them. And so I think because I was always focused on what's the solution, like, I don't know, we need to get motorbikes from A to B in the South Kivu, which is famous for being really, really dangerous. I would just be like, right, what can we do? Okay, well, we can travel at an unpredictable time. We've never traveled that before. We can wear bulletproof vests if we need to. I can buy this equipment to protect people. Like, I don't know. I think this solution mindset protected me from worrying. I guess there's some control there to a certain bizarre extent.
Yeah, so you're making decisions. Maybe you feel more in control if you're making the decisions. And also it's more pragmatic as opposed to emotional. Like you're just saying, well, this is looking at the information.
Yeah, I guess so. But I guess that's just an insight into my psychology, which is perhaps not that helpful. But for anybody who's worried about going and working in a dangerous place, if you go and work for an NGO or you work for a commercial company, they've always got all these security policies in place that protect you. Like, things rarely happen to anybody. It rarely happen to expats in these sorts of locations. Like, there's a few incidents, but like it's very, very rare. To the point where it's quite over the top, right? So like, I don't know, Mercy Corps, for example, or Doctors Without Borders, they'll have curfews. You've got to be at home by 9 o'clock. You can't go out. I was running my own organisation. I was like, sod that, I'm partying till 12. I don't care.
Yeah.
But normally organisations have a lot in place, so you don't have to worry.
Yeah, they've thought about it, right? They're smart people and they've thought about it, and lots of other people have concern. So it's not, you wouldn't be the first
security
person.
management.
Yeah.
So they know what they're doing.
Yeah, fair enough.
I was making it up, but I suppose so.
Brilliant. So in terms of like working through the bureaucracy, trying to set up the country, trying to get funding from government, what do you think was the biggest learning through all that? For me, that sounds very difficult. It almost sounds overwhelming. Where do you even start with that? What do you think was effective in terms of securing funding, getting through bureaucracy so you could actually deliver the aid that you're really trying to deliver?
So I guess I've got sort of a philosophical answer and a bit more of a pragmatic answer to that. The philosophical answer is, bloody hell, like, we can literally do anything. Like, if you set your mind to it, you can find a solution to everything. There's very few things in the world that you cannot find a solution to, or at least a way of coping with something. So I think that's my personal takeaway from it. I've proven to myself that in the hardest of places, I could still get shit done. It still raised 10 million. Nobody ever got kidnapped in my organisation, which was rare. Most places had at least some sort of kidnapping. So I was very proud of that, and that has proved to me for the rest of my life that human beings are capable of a hell of a lot. If you just set your mind to it and you've got the right attitude. And then in more practical terms, I think one thing that's consistent across all of the sounds like I'm boasting all the things I achieved today, but anything that was successful for Give Directly in the Congo was, I think it's like relationships. So when you mentioned the fundraising, so I spent a year building a relationship with a really senior government official, building trust, like talking about our personal lives, going out to lunch, selling bit by bit why this was a good idea to. That was a relationship. Again, with my team, the leadership piece. It's all about the relationships I had with them. Could I make them feel motivated and desire to come to work and actually want to be productive there? When I gave them constructive feedback, was the relationship strong enough for them to understand that I cared about them succeeding, both at Give Directly and outside of Give Directly? Ultimately, all of it comes down to relationships, decent communication skills, emotional intelligence, and all those good things.
I guess you're building relationships with the local community as well.
Yeah, really important. And I had some cock-ups along the way. I mean, we had a protest and people throwing stuff at our office at some point. And again, you just learn. Okay, what can I take away from this? Okay, well, we buggered that. We didn't do the right communications with the community. Next time, it's always the solution thing. No matter what bad thing happens, okay, well, let's put that in a matrix. X, Y, Z things happens. What are the solutions to those things? How do we mitigate that in the future? How do we solve it if it happens? And if you apply that to life...
And just work through it very pragmatically. Yeah. Because when it's on the page, it's a bit more cold, it's a bit more black and white, right? Whereas when it's whirling around in our heads, it's kind of harder. Maybe it's more emotional.
Yeah.
Do you think building relationships with the local community helps to keep the team safe?
Oh yeah, big time. But I mean, this is like really specific to Congo, but to be a good security manager in Congo, you actually have to be friends with the rebels because that's how you understand what they're doing. It's like a really specific nuance that I won't go down too much of a channel with, but yeah, you stand no chance. If you don't have a good relationship with the general community, and if you don't have a security person who has a good relationship with the other side, the bad guys, you're literally never going to succeed.
Yeah, right. Well, fascinating. The relationships are at the core of everything with the team, with the rebels, with the government ministers, and with the local community, bringing it all together, right? Because then, I guess if you have that trust and that relationship, then you can actually get stuff done. But that didn't last forever, right? You decided you wanted to leave Congo at some stage. I guess that's why we're here, right?
I guess.
So how come you decided to move on from that? Was it just you'd done a good shift, and maybe I would imagine you'd get tired of that. Like it would be you could risk burnout if you're
again. I burnt out a lot of times. I was getting tonsillitis on average once a month. Came back to England, got my tonsils locked out. That helps. This was a really hard job and this really burnt me out. So I'd had like a London type burning out job, and then I had like a Congo type burning out job that was a lot more satisfying.
You can stop jobs without burning out, right?
Yeah, I know, Ronan. I learned that after this job. Why did I leave Congo? There's a few reasons. So one, I decided it was just time to take a step back from being hugely mission driven and sort of almost in a relationship with my jobs and find something that was a bit more balanced for me. Two, at this point I was 33, I think. And I thought if I ever want to have a family, I need to leave essentially a war zone. If I want to have a stable relationship. So again, personal life reason there. Three, on the professional side, I love like the scrappy startup bit where there's no process, as I mentioned earlier. I love like building something from scratch. I love there being no rules. Like I love being able to just make up a rule. I love waking up in the morning and just being like, let's not do things that traditional way and do it completely differently. And I think at this point, the organization had got to, depending on the project, we'd got to anywhere between 50 and 100 people being on payroll. And once you get to that size, that's when you start having to have processes and rules and protocols and things are just bigger. It's not as scrappy anymore, and that's the point. And I was really happy. I'd managed to. I think it was 10 million at this point. So I'd managed to secure the next sort of like couple of years of this organization's future, and that was a good time for me to step away and let someone take over that was more comfortable with the more setup.
Yeah, fantastic. So that's really your sweet spot, is going into that scrappy place and creating the rules and ripping up the rule book that doesn't exist yet.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, you seem to come across like a little bit maverick, right?
Maybe I have.
Yeah, right.
Although I wouldn't have said anyone would ever say that about me until my professional career. I don't. Well, you can.
Well, there we go. Maybe this is the first.
You can judge, but I don't think anyone outside of my career would necessarily say that about me.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess it's about knowing the times to change the rules or do something different, and then the times when you got to listen to people and build relationships and go back to sort of traditional, maybe approach a little bit slower, right?
Yeah.
So you decided to leave for a combination of personal, professional reasons, which makes total sense. And then what was the next step from there? Like, how do you go from a very thrilling, I guess, exciting / a little bit dangerous situation to back to normal life, back to, well, let's say normal Western European life, right?
Yeah, that was hard. I decided it was time to move back to Europe to be closer to family and hopefully have some sort of sensible relationship and long-lasting friendships. Because the NGO space, like in-country NGO space, is very transient, right? Like you make friends for 6 months, they leave, which wears a bit thin after a while. But so I was looking to move back to Europe. Couldn't quite bring myself to move back to England because that just felt like, I don't know, anyone who's ever travelled abroad, like you go back home and you're just like, God, it's like nothing ever happened. Everything's the same. And something quite bizarre about that. Didn't feel fun enough. So yeah, decided to move to Lisbon and work remotely because by this point, COVID had happened. Not that that was ever relevant in Congo. We had Ebola and we didn't give a crap about COVID.
Right. Your bigger problems.
Yeah, exactly. Much bigger problems. But yeah, so decided to move to Lisbon, bizarrely, because it was the closest thing to Goma in Eastern Congo I could find, with a body of water, lots of green around, easy access to adventures, bike rides. So bizarrely, I decided Lisbon was the closest thing to East Africa, which no one else will be able to relate to.
Right.
And yeah, started working remotely. So I took a chief of staff role. Chief of staff is like the most generalist, senior
sort of
position.
head of operations, similar kind of thing, or a little bit different?
No. So chief of staff roles are essentially you are a support to the CEO of a company, typically to the head of a company. So the concept started out in the military. Then, if anyone's watched any political dramas, it's the person that scuttles after the president and sort of does everything that they need doing after meeting and briefs and whatever.
It's not quite executive assistant though, right? Because it can be confused with that, I think, sometimes.
Yeah, that's a good question. So executive assistant is more on the administrative functioning of the CEO. So they help plan like a CEO's diary and
meetings and stuff. But this is more strategic. Your role is more strategic.
Yeah, chief of staff role. Often people that get hired for chief of staff have been management consultants before. So typically strategic or operational, a bit of like leadership support. But really it can be anything. It really depends on what is the gap in that company at the moment. So what is the best chief of staff is someone who's the opposite of the CEO. So if the CEO is bad at something, that chief of staff will be good at that thing.
Like the Queen on a chessboard. The Queen, because the Queen can do all the different moves, right?
Exactly.
The Queen can fit in any different way.
Exactly. Oh my God, I'm the Queen in chess. So typically you get hired if you've got a ton of like transferable skills, a ton of experience in loads and loads of different areas, because you can't just be like you can't just be like a bloody dentist or a marketing person. Like you need to help a CEO with the entire company. Yep. And that's where like the Congo experience of heading up the whole organization, like seeing a bit of HR, seeing a bit of legal, seeing a bit of strategy, blah, 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 comes in handy. But yes, chief of staff role is a bizarre one because it can be anything. It's totally different in every organization. But things that remain consistently true are that it's very senior. So you're exposed to the CEO and all of the executive team, which is great for learning. Like you get to see the C-level of every department and what they do. And you chair their meetings and you follow through on their meetings. It's just amazing for learning. And what also remains true is that you work really, really close with the CEO, which means you know exactly what's going on at the top and you have great impact and influence over the whole company.
Wow, fantastic. So really in the CEO's ear and listening to all the heads of department and learning from them. So you must pick up some... Did you pick up any real top tips there from like working with all the heads of departments?
I've got a naughty...
What goes on in there? What goes on in their minds?
I got a naughty answer for that. I think that everyone thinks that people who are like director, VP, C-level, that they're like these gods and they're insanely good at their jobs and whatever. And CEOs, you just think CEOs, oh my God, they're just like geniuses. And actually they're not. They're just regular people that are crap at some parts of their job. You know, with a CEO, for example, you usually get, either someone who's incredibly smart who started a company, but they've got no people skills and no idea how to grow a team. I've seen that. Or you can get people who've got a ton of people skills and they're wonderful, but they're not that smart. Or you get someone somewhere in the middle, but they're lacking on, a whole bunch of areas. People start up companies when they're in their 20s and they have the energy to, which means they don't have that much work experience. Yep. They've actually got loads of blind spots. And then they need to hire in a chief of staff to fill in those blind spots, because all they've been doing is like in the attic with their co-founder, like nerding away over this business idea, but not experiencing the rest of the world. This is not always true, but I think that my main point is that...
but they're not all seeing, all knowing...
they're often quite useless in certain areas. And so I think that's just a good reminder to anyone, even if you're in your first job, if you're in your second job, there are people at the top who don't bloody know what they're doing. Actually, one of the best CEO I ever had, CEO of Third Bridge, called Emmanuel, he taught me this. He taught me how important humility was in leadership. And he would come to company-wide meetings and say, I'm stuck. I don't know what to do next. Or I've got an investor meeting, like we're doing a fundraise meeting. This is, to do with the survival of the company, and I'm scared. And he showed me, he was really smart, very successful company. And he showed me that people at the top still have the same worries that people at the bottom have. They just have fancy job titles and look a bit more stressed.
Yeah. Fascinating, isn't it?
Just worth remembering.
So maybe they're good at hiring people and then delegating the work, or they're good at noticing maybe where their blind spots are. Yes. And then taking, maybe they have the confidence as well to take people on and to hire people.
Yeah. I think CEOs tend to know who they need to hire to fix problems, but the good CEOs know how to manage those people well. It's not enough to just throw money at like a CTO and hope that your company does well. They need to know how to manage them all together.
Or hire a chief of staff if you're really not sure how to.
You don't have a bloody clue. Honestly, when you join a company as a chief of staff, they're like, I don't know what the job description should be. Can you please tell me what your job description should be?
Write your own job description and then go do that, right?
It is.
And report back to me. Okay, fantastic.
Yeah.
So then that takes us on then you moved from that role to your most recent role, isn't that right?
Yeah, so I joined as a chief of staff at Omnipresent, which is an employer of record company. Essentially, anyone who wants to work remotely can work in any country in the world that they want to, as long as their employer is willing to pay them through an employer of record, EOR as it's commonly known. There's various different systems, that's the most well known. But the reason I joined that company is because they were experts in international hiring, and I was moving from Congo to Portugal, and I was like, if anyone knows what to do with this, like how to get me on payroll and work remotely, the rest is them. But HR tech wasn't for me. I don't find HR particularly, HR tech, I don't find it as interesting as like inventing digital money payments in the humanitarian space in Congo. You can imagine my motivation was lower and the impact I was seeing was lower. But really, really good learning experience. Now I'm working at an American company that's based in Portugal called Hala Systems. And that is a really nice, it sort of straddles both commercial work and traditional sort of humanitarian or development work as well. In the call it the peace tech space.
So what's your role there?
Chief of staff as well.
Oh, she's chief of staff as well.
Yeah.
Okay, and how's that going?
It's similar to my last position, but in terms of all of the exposure that I get, but completely different subject matter with different problems in the company that need fixing. So actually, I think I could do a few chief of staff roles and still feel like I'm learning a ton about different spaces, different people, how to fix different problems. So yeah, really interesting as well.
If you're giving advice to somebody who thinks like that chief of staff sort of role seems really interesting, maybe they've never heard of it before, but they like the idea of building relationships, working with lots of different people, getting to create the rules and change the rules. Would you have any advice for a course they should study or any jobs they should take on, or just like you talk about sales skills, you talk about influencing, building relationships. What somebody who's thinking of, it sounds like, being in the ear as the CEO and being working on strategy, that sounds fascinating. What would you say?
So part of the answer is needing to build up your CV to be able to do that. You need a diverse bunch of experience. So heading up a business unit, whatever, having exposure to loads of different stuff, or just if you've been a management consultant, you can probably worm your way into a chief of staff role. It's a very traditional path. And then the other part is There's a forum, which maybe you can stick a link in there in the video, but there's a forum, it's like a chief of staff forum that is the best one that I found. It's paid, you have to pay per month. But that's the biggest network of chief of staff that I found. And they post job openings on that forum. And it's actually really useful. I don't use it enough, but they answer. You can ask any question, any problem you're having as a chief of staff, and they will share answers. And it'll be anything from like, how do you set the objectives of the company for the year, down to like, how do I don't know, can't think of another example, but any single question you can.
How do I deal with a team member who's not motivated or whatever it might be, right?
Yeah, it could literally be any question about a whole business, because a chief of staff applies to almost anything going wrong in a business, and there's answers there on how to fix it. So not only can you maybe find a job through that, but you can also find out how to deal with your problems.
That's great.
As well.
It's also a great tip for people. You know, you can research best practice from other people doing the same job as you if you search online and
Yeah, it's a great general tip as well. It comes back to my point of don't be afraid to look stupid and ask questions. If you're struggling at something in your job, post it in a forum and like 10 people are going to write back and tell you how to do it.
Absolutely.
Always be keen to learn really, really quickly.
Yeah, that's how I found my software for recording videos. I posted it in a forum and someone said, this is the best software you need to use, and it saved me tons of time.
It all comes back to networking. And as I say, my first ever job was networking with investors. And that taught me just to be completely brazen, just cold call complete strangers, and you'll be blown away by how helpful human beings are happy to be.
Did you just get into that, or did you learn sales skills at any point?
Oh God, no. I had no sales skills. Actually, I took the job not even realizing it was a sales job, because they sort of rebranded it to make it look more sexy at the time.
Very sneaky.
Very sneaky. And then I get in, and within a week, they like pick up the phone, call the CEO of Argos, or like call it, because I was in commercial goods and retail, like call the CEO of Woolworths. Woolworths was around at the time. Well, it's closed down now.
Okay.
But like big brand names that I've seen and I've shopped in and whatever, like call the CEO, call it now. And I'm like, ah. And it's like anything. I think you just have to do it and go through the pain of how terrifying it is. But if you just keep doing it and you do it multiple times, all close together, you become completely desensitized to it very, very quickly. Like insecurity in the Congo, whatever it might be. But if you do 20 cold calls, you can guarantee the 20th one's better than the first one. And I think I just became desensitized so quickly from making 10 phone calls a day that I now will literally pick up the phone and speak to anyone. That's great for finding a new job. It's great for networking and everything. It's great for finding tech for your interviews.
It's great it's a great life tip, isn't it? Yeah. If you can network, or if you can pick up the phone, or get used to doing something repeatedly, so that you don't have the emotional stress about feeling rejected or feeling embarrassed or feeling whatever it is.
Exactly.
You start thinking, I need to get 10 instead of, oh, I hope this person says yes to me or no to me. You're thinking, I need to do 10 of these and move through.
And again, it comes back to the feedback point. So I would have people sitting next to me. This sounds terrible, but I'd have people sitting next to me as I pick up the phone and call someone, and they had to give me like 3 things I could have done better at the end of the call. I was dying for the first few days. It was awful, because this is not normal for people to do. By the end of the first week, I was dramatically better, because I'd received like 50 points on how to do this well. I was listening to other people on the phone on how they were doing their cold calling, and I was copying their sentences.
But as you started, was that a knock to your confidence when people are kind of giving you all this criticism, or are they peppering in a little bit of positivity in there as well? I think it was really uncomfortable at first, but because the culture of the company was like loads of positive feedback, loads of constructive feedback, people knew how to do a shit sandwich, right? So they'd be like, love the way you started the call. You sounded really confident. How about if you try, reducing how much you say by 50%, because you should be speaking a lot less than the other person, and also love that you did this. Shit sandwiches, like everyone knows there's a shit sandwich, but it helps. Just for anyone who doesn't specifically know what a shit sandwich is, a shit sandwich is also known as a confidence sandwich, where it's where you have like a positive compliment, constructive piece of feedback, and then another positive compliment, right? Yeah. But your definition is good as well. I love it.
Yeah.
Super. So Just one or two more things I wanted to ask you. So a day in the life as chief of staff for the current company, what's that look like? Because no real concept of what that day would look like.
Sure. The first thing to say is that it's great, because you can kind of pick what projects you work on depending on what is needed by the company and where your strengths are and what you're interested in. So you're not always working on the same thing. But at the moment, for example, so it's January, so we're setting the strategy for the year. We use what plenty of people will know as OKRs, or objectives and key results. So it's my job to convert 2 months worth of strategy conversations with the 2 founders and the head of strategy into like a concise list of like 10 objectives and key results that are like the company's level. And then I hold a meeting with the executive committee. So the executive committee is the head of every department. So call it like head of sales, head of tech, whatever. So there's maybe like 8 of them. And I help them then interpret the company level strategy into what each of their departments should be doing. And they come out with their 10 lines of what they should be delivering for the year. I mean, I'm just thinking about this week, what I've done. Then I converted all of that into a company level presentation. We often call all hands in startups. So everyone from the company dials in and the CEO presents and has some guest speakers. But he's presenting like a retrospective on 2023, what we learned, what went well, what didn't, what we're going to change this year. And then looking forward at 2024, like what are we going to do differently? So that's like a piece on converting like founder ideas into a reality, which is a lot of what I do as a chief of staff. It's like, how do you operationalize the brains of the nerds that drive the business?
Yeah, that's what I'm hearing.
Yeah, and I really like that. Like, so many people talk so much, but they don't do enough. And I see my personal role as a chief of staff has always been, how do I stop people just talking the talk and actually walk the walk?
Yeah.
And that comes down to literally like write an objective that is this, and then I personally hold the executive team accountable to delivering on that. And if they don't, explaining to their peers why they failed.
Yeah. So you're really helping them realize the objectives. It goes from just being, I'm an ideas person to, well, let's also be the implementation people.
Yes.
And then realizing those objectives. So you're kind of doing a lot of heavy lifting for the organization in terms of the strategy and keeping, there's always a question, right? It's like, who's driving the bus? It seems like the chief of staff is driving the bus a lot of the time.
I don't want to take that credit, but I think I hold all the people driving various vehicles to account. It's like the glue that keeps everything together.
Yeah.
So founders and executive teams, they're typically very, very smart, but are they actually all working really well together? Are they actually talking to each other about their various projects and making sure they...
So you're linking everyone in together.
Yeah. It's a lot of linking people together and managing those relationships, making sure they work well together to actually deliver on what you need to deliver to keep everyone in a job at the end of the day and for the business to succeed.
Yeah, so you're linking everyone together, you're putting the strategy together, you're calling those big meetings. And then the CEO is really thinking of the higher level overall strategy. Yeah. But because I guess you're so much in it, you can actually identify gaps and places for improvement as well.
Yeah. And like a CEO doesn't have time to think. Like they literally go back to back meeting. They don't really have time to execute. They don't have time to do their homework if you think about it in a school way. So like imagine you go to lectures all day or you go to classes all day. They don't have the time to actually do the follow-up on those meetings. The chief of staff has the time to either follow up like myself and do execute on the thing, or for the most part, communicate with the people that need to execute on it, brief them on it, hold them accountable to doing it, report back to the CEO.
Like, would you find you have to like compile tons of information and then just give the CEO one or two key messages?
Executive summaries, yes. Yeah. So maybe I will speak to 20 people about a particular topic and I'll come back to him and I'll explain it to him in 2 minutes.
Yeah.
That's a skill in itself, like creating an executive summary from lots of information. Or like imagine any like academic report you might have ever read, there might be a report that's 50 pages long, but often at the top there's a paragraph that's like summary or executive summary.
Yeah.
You have to be able to boil down so much information and then not awful about it.
And get it to its absolute essential.
Because time is of the essence with the CEO. We've got so many things to do. You can't spend half an hour explaining something when it could be done in a minute. Yeah,
super. That's a real top skill. It's a good skill for everyone to learn, right? Separating the noise from the signal and being able to communicate it in a concise way.
Yeah.
Totally. So if you're to choose one of your favorite things from your current role, which is actually, you've done similar kind of roles over your career so far. And then one thing that you kind of struggle with, you don't really like, it's just something you have to do because we don't want to just pretend like everything is easy and wonderful all the time. Because we all have to do the things we love and things we don't love so much. What would be one of each?
I think the best thing about the chief of staff role is that you never feel helpless that you're just stuck in a company that's doing something irritating, because I can speak to the CEO within a minute and be like, we need to change this thing. Here are the reasons why. This is what happens if we don't do it. If you say yes, I'll implement that thing and it'll happen. Like, there's something really nice about having the control to improve stuff. And I hear, I'm sure you hear this too, so many friends moaning, oh, it's so annoying at work. There's this thing we have to do, or I don't like this.
We have to, right? We have to do this, we have to do that.
Because that's never the case with me. Like, I can always, at worst case scenario, have a very good rational reason from the CEO about why we can't change that thing. So I really like that. I like the sort of impact and immediate resolution of problems you can have in this role, which has been true for most of my career, I think. With the, I should add in a caveat, like I really like that. And I really like that whilst I'm on a salary and not being self-employed. So like, this is the reason why a lot of people become self-employed, right? They want to have total control. They don't have to deal with an annoying boss and rules and all the rest. But I've been able to do that through the roles that I've talked about, with the security of a salary, without having to worry about that.
Do you feel that was by design or by luck?
Well, I don't know if I would go so far as to say by design, but I've always chosen not to become independent because I don't like the lack of sort of guaranteed salary.
Or maybe the people you worked with felt that you were well able to have agency of your own work, so they felt cool. They were like, oh, well, she's going to do a long day, she's going to work really hard, she's totally dedicated, we don't really need to look over her shoulder. So maybe that's part of why you were able to have so much agency over your roles.
Yeah.
But it wasn't like something you said when you're 18. It's like, oh, I kind of want to have my own businesses inside other businesses where I can have total control.
Oh, God, no. It just randomly happened. Totally randomly happened. And then something that I don't like about my role, I end up spending a lot of time holding people accountable to having to do their roles. And I think before the chief of staff role, when you're holding people accountable to work, so just like making sure they do their shit, accountability, it's usually people that you manage, right? So when you manage people, it's kind of, I'm going to exaggerate, but like, if you don't do your shit, you're going to get fired, right? So there's a certain hierarchical dynamic there, which you can lean on to make people do stuff in the nicest of possible ways, but it's implicit. The annoying thing about the chief of staff role is that you don't manage anyone. You're this weird lone ranger that's just floating about, being this odd glue between everyone. But I'm not people's manager. So if I'm telling general counsel they need to do that, I'm using that as an example because the general counsel at my company is actually excellent at accountability. But if I'm like asking the general counsel to do something, I don't have the sort of, and I'll be writing your performance review in a few weeks' time, and I will quote that you didn't do this, and that will lead to something.
So you have to be more of a diplomat then.
Yeah, and it's just like, that's tedious because I really like coaching people to be better, and that's not part of my role now.
Right.
Although coaching the CEO to be better is part of my role, which has more impact if they're coachable and they implement that stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's just a bit trickier when you don't have that same ability to have those performance reviews or whatever it might be, right? You have to use more diplomacy and influencing skills.
Yeah, which takes more time. It's more tedious.
Yeah, fantastic. Just before we wrap up, do you have any, I think we've covered lots of good stuff, from building relationships to influencing, networking, taking control of your own career and working internally to, kind of have businesses inside. But is there any final tips let's say a tip that you thought would have been great when you were starting out in your career that you would like other people to know?
I think I've mentioned quite a few tips so far, but I would kind of summarize that the best way to earn a bunch of money within an organization and have plenty of influence is to get into a leadership type position as early on in your career as you can. Do anything to get management experience. And if you haven't been a manager yet, offer to be someone's, like, we used to call them buddies, accountability buddies.
Yeah.
God, that's awful. It's clearly an American that came up with that. But they offer to coach someone. So I remember what I did before I was ever a proper manager with direct reports is I'd been at the company, say, a year. I offered to buddy up with someone who just joined, and I showed to my manager how I could give feedback to someone, how I could motivate them, be an underperformer. And I'd say, like, give me an underperformer, I'll help them. And then my manager would see that I managed to coach them up. I've now proven that I have management skills. And then when the next round of hiring comes up for managers, I got a manager position. So that's my tip on getting into management in the first place, if there isn't an open position right now, or if you don't have experience on your CV. But like, I think that's the best thing I ever did. Like, work for a fast growing company, which enabled me to get into management. That enabled me to, from my sort of late 20s, earn decent salary and have decent influence on a company, which leads to satisfaction and all the rest.
That's a great tip. Yeah. So I love the way you're demonstrating your value of leadership while you're in your current position, and then it's a much easier decision for them to actually bring you up then and give you the opportunity then. And also when you're working in the smaller companies, you get a chance to, if there's only 5 people and you're hiring more people, you're going to be one of the leaders much sooner than if you go into an organization with 500 people.
Yeah. And even, to be honest, not even just on the leadership bit, but if you're in a company that's so small, I wouldn't actually recommend 5. I would say like minimum 20, like Series A. Minimum Series A is what I would play with, because before that it's quite risky. But if they've got like, say, 20, 30 people, what you'll find is that whatever role you've been hired for, you're probably going to be able to dip your fingers in plenty of other bits. So maybe you've been hired for marketing, but you're actually doing a bit of product and you're actually doing a little bit of sales. You can always help out because there's always so much work to be done. They don't have enough money to hire loads of people for all of it. So that's when you start getting those generalist skills. You don't necessarily need to want to be a generalist forever, but it keeps your options open. If you're wanting to change when you're 25, when you're 30, when you're 35, you've got those little bits of experience that you can leverage for interviews and for knowing what to do. So yeah, I do think that's a big benefit to smaller companies as well.
Fantastic tips. Absolutely wonderful. I love it. Thanks so much for regaling us with all your stories of working in startups, going to the Congo, coming back to Europe and working as a chief of staff. Fantastic and fascinating to hear all your stories. So thanks so much. Really appreciate it.
You're very welcome.